Hey folks, welcome. Today we're going to talk about the new update that just came out for Nebulous Fleece Command. This is update 0.1.0.9, which is called the ELINT rework, or sorry, it's called Crossfixed. The biggest change here is the rework of electronic warfare. So what they've done is they've taken the Pinard, which is the device that lets you detect enemy radar in a line away from your ship up to a pretty much infinite distance, and they've changed the way that it works so that now you get a target track if you have multiple ELINTs pointing at the same target. So you can basically triangulate your position, the position of an enemy, using multiple ELINT devices if the enemy has radar enabled. So this is a substantial change to the electronic warfare aspect of gameplay. And one of the some important things to know about the ELINT mechanics are if you have multiple Pinards that are close to each other, it messes up your targeting data. And the further away your Pinards are from each other that are detecting the same target, the better your targeting data is. So they call that, it's called synthetic aperture, which is the, amount of, think of it as having a telescope that's as wide as the distance in between the two sensors, right? That's why it's called synthetic aperture, because I don't actually have a telescope that's that wide, but I'm taking readings at two different positions that are far apart from each other, so it's equivalent to having a telescope that's as wide as that distance. So the further apart the ships are from each other that have the Pinard system pointing at that one target, the more accurate your track is. The other thing about it, though, is that the ELINT track from the Pinard doesn't provide velocity data, which means that it gives you a really good idea where the enemies are, but it's not really accurate for like shooting railguns, for example. So it's still very useful to have a traditional radar track on the target. And the other thing, of course, is the ELINT, the Pinard only picks up active radar signals, so if an enemy ship has their radar turned off, it won't get picked up at all. So just bear that in mind. One thing you want to do, if you're playing against somebody with Pinards, or you might be playing against somebody with Pinards because you usually don't know early in the match, it can be a good idea to have your radar turned off, or maybe turn it on briefly periodically so you can get an update to see if enemies are in the area, and then turn it off again when you don't need it. So it's like another thing that you have to think about in the electronic warfare scale, which is kind of cool. This ownership transfer thing is also a big deal. Some games have had a network issue where a player can get disconnected. Like, let's say you're playing a 4v4, right? And one of the 8 players gets disconnected. The people on that team then are stuck fighting a 3v4. Well, not anymore with this patch. What they've done is they've said, okay, well, one person gets disconnected. I'm going to take the ships that person was controlling, and I'm going to reassign them to the other players that are on the same team according to how much space they have. So each player can only control 10 ships at a time, right? So it'll try to take like an entire formation. If the ships are split up into multiple formations, it'll take a formation and assign it to a player if they have enough room to take all those ships. And so it'll divvy it up as evenly as possible. And then it'll only mark those ships as abandoned if there's no player left who has the ability to take over those ships. In order to counter jamming, they've also added a stat called noise filtering. The adaptive radar receiver component has an additional noise filtering stat, which is makes it a lot more powerful and useful, and that helps counteract some of the jamming and makes it easier to detect stuff. They've also made some changes to power management. So basically, there's some kind of logic now where only systems that are actively being used for the most part are actually going to consume power. So there's certain things that are on all the time. There's some things like weapons. If you're firing a weapon, it's going to use power. If you don't fire a weapon, it's not going to use power, and things like that. So it's worth reading the patch notes in detail just to kind of figure out, the power management aspect. And then there's a bunch of other little changes. One of my favorites is one that I actually requested in the feature suggestions on Discord, which is that they add an alarm bell that sounds when your ships are about to withdraw. So I'm super happy about that for obvious reasons. If you've watched my streams before or watched my channel, you probably know that alarm bell has already gone off for me multiple times, and it saved my ships from being removed from the match. So I'm happy about that, and there's a bunch of other little changes that you can read about here in the patch notes. I just went over the big ones here. some things they buffed the mass driver, so that's a big one. And then they changed the point cost of the adaptive radar receiver because it's more useful now for filtering out noise. So you may have to make some adjustments to your existing fleets if you're trying to get under a certain point value, like a 3,000 point fleet. So that's the patch. Enjoy. Check out the Steam page for Nebulous Fleet Command if you want to get every single thing. This is just the major points. And I want to say thank you for watching.